How far would you go for someone you love? Would you cross every boundary, ignore every warning, and risk everything, even your own well-being? Sometimes, the answers aren't as simple as they seem. There are moments in life when a choice must be made, a choice that could change everything. This is the story of one such moment. A story of sacrifice, devotion, and betrayal that will leave you questioning the very nature of love and loyalty. What if the person you trusted the most, the person you built your life around, asked for your help in their most vulnerable hour? Would you give them everything, even if it meant losing yourself? Would you step into the fire, knowing you might not survive the burn? Tonight, we delve into the harrowing journey of a woman who faced such a decision. A decision that led her down a path no one could have foreseen. A decision that would change lives forever. As you hear her story, ask yourself this: how much would you sacrifice for someone who has already broken your heart? And when betrayal follows sacrifice, where do you draw the line? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know, what would you do if faced with a choice like this? Now, let's begin. Welcome to True Crime Archives. Thank you to all our viewers, especially our amazing subscribers, for your continued support. Your encouragement drives us to keep improving and delivering the most compelling daily updates on both told and untold true crime stories. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts. Stay tuned, there's so much more to uncover. Tamara Blake grew up in a modest household, the eldest of 3 siblings. From an early age, she displayed a quiet determination that set her apart. While others dreamt of fame or luxury, Tamara dreamt of stability, a life where hard work could build a foundation for a better future. She was the kind of woman who carried the weight of her family's expectations without complaint, someone who found pride in her ability to give more than she received. Tamara's ambition wasn't loud or ostentatious. She wasn't chasing the spotlight. Instead, she focused on creating a life of purpose and independence. Even as a young woman, she juggled multiple jobs while attending night classes, hoping to one day own her own home. She dreamed of being financially secure, not just for herself, but for the family she hoped to build. But as life often does, her plans would soon take an unexpected turn. Enter Lionel Blake. Where Tamara was quiet strength, Lionel was all charm and energy. He had a way of lighting up a room, of drawing people to him with his easy smile and infectious laugh. At first glance, Lionel seemed like everything Tamara had been waiting for. He was attentive, fun, and full of dreams, or so it appeared. Their meeting felt serendipitous, like the kind of moment Tamara might have read about in one of the romance novels she secretly enjoyed. But Lionel Blake was a man of contradictions. Beneath the charm was a restless spirit, a man drawn more to instant gratification than long-term responsibility. While he spoke of big plans and endless potential, his actions rarely aligned with his words. Lionel loved the thrill of life, the latest gadgets, extravagant nights out, and a lifestyle that often outpaced his means. It wasn't long before Tamara began to see glimpses of this side of him, but by then, she was already in love. Their courtship was a whirlwind, filled with passionate highs and moments that made Tamara believe she had found her partner for life. He showered her with compliments, promised her the world, and made her feel seen in a way no one ever had. She believed in him, even when his flaws became harder to ignore. Her family raised concerns, pointing out Lionel's impulsiveness and tendency to shirk responsibility. But Tamara, ever loyal, defended him, convinced that love could overcome any obstacle. When they married, it was a day filled with hope. Tamara looked radiant, and Lionel, ever the charmer, seemed genuinely happy. But the cracks in their foundation began to show almost immediately. Tamara quickly took on the role of the steady provider, working tirelessly to keep their household afloat while Lionel spent more than they could afford. His love for materialism, nights out with friends, and a tendency to disappear when things got tough created a strain that Tamara tried to bear silently. As the years passed, Tamara's life became a delicate balancing act. She worked harder than ever, determined to create the stability she had always dreamed of. But her body bore the brunt of the stress. After giving birth to their 2 children, she struggled with weight gain brought on by hormonal imbalances and the demands of motherhood. Lionel, instead of offering support, began to criticize her appearance. His words, sharp and cutting, left scars that Tamara hid behind a brave face. Despite his flaws, Lionel had an uncanny ability to make Tamara doubt her own worth. When he called her a misfortune or dismissed her as good for nothing, she would quietly internalize the pain, convincing herself that her sacrifices were part of being a good wife and mother. She stayed, not because she didn't see the truth of his character, but because she believed in the vows she had taken. Divorce was not an option in her mind, especially as a Christian woman who placed her children's well-being above her own. Lionel, meanwhile, drifted further into his self-destructive habits. His extramarital affairs became an open secret, and his drinking escalated to a point where even his closest friends began to distance themselves. Yet, every time he hit rock bottom, it was Tamara who picked him up. She loaned him money, forgave his indiscretions, and made excuses for his behavior, even when her family urged her to leave him. To outsiders, their marriage was a mystery. How could a woman like Tamara, a hard-working, selfless individual, remain tethered to someone who gave so little in return? But Tamara wasn't driven by logic. She was driven by hope. Hope that Lionel would one day change. Hope that her sacrifices would eventually be repaid in kind. And so, she endured, quietly carrying the weight of a marriage that seemed destined to break her. As their children grew older, the contrast between Tamara's unwavering loyalty and Lionel's selfishness became even more stark. Her children noticed the tension, the unspoken pain that lingered in their home. But Tamara shielded them as best as she could, determined to give them the stability she had always longed for. In her heart, she believed that love could conquer even the deepest flaws. What she didn't realize was that Lionel saw her love not as a gift, but as a weakness to exploit. This was the foundation of their marriage, a bond built on Tamara's sacrifices and Lionel's endless taking. And as life would soon show, there is only so much one person can give before they have nothing left. It's said that love can endure all things, but what happens when one partner treats that love as a license to take and destroy? For Tamara Blake, the weight of her marriage to Lionel became heavier with each passing year. The man she once believed would be her partner in building a life together had instead become the very thing tearing her down. From the early years of their marriage, Lionel's actions began to chip away at the foundation they had built. It started with small cracks, excuses for late nights out, unexplained absences, and whispers that grew louder about his behavior. Tamara, trusting and loyal, wanted to believe the best in him. But the truth was undeniable. Lionel was unfaithful. Each new scandal felt like a knife in Tamara's heart. Rumors of other women, some fleeting, others more serious, spread through their community. When confronted, Lionel didn't bother with denials. Instead, he lashed out. "You're a misfortune," he once told her in a heated argument. "I could have been free if it weren't for you." To Lionel, Tamara was no longer the vibrant woman he had married. She had become, in his eyes, a burden, and he made sure she felt it. The words cut deeper than the betrayals themselves. Lionel's constant criticism, his cruel remarks about her weight, and his blatant disregard for her feelings left Tamara emotionally bruised. She began to withdraw, carrying her pain silently, unwilling to let the world see the cracks in her marriage. Yet, the toll on her was undeniable. The stress began to manifest physically, her energy drained, her health suffered, and her once bright spirit dimmed. Despite the relentless strain, Tamara's resilience was remarkable. She stayed, not out of ignorance, but because of her deeply held beliefs. As a devout Christian, she saw her marriage as a covenant, a promise that could not be broken. She reminded herself of the vows she had taken and the family she had built. Divorce was not an option. How could she abandon the father of her children, no matter how flawed he was? Her children were her anchor. For them, she bore the insults, the humiliation, and the loneliness that had become her daily reality. She believed that staying was the best thing she could do for their stability and future. But her sacrifice did not go unnoticed by those closest to her. Tamara's friends and family grew increasingly concerned. They saw the toll Lionel's behavior was taking on her and begged her to leave. "You deserve better, Tamara," they told her repeatedly. "He doesn't appreciate you. He never will." But Tamara's heart was heavy with conflict. Could she leave the man she had loved for so long? Could she break her children's family apart, even if staying meant sacrificing herself? Then, everything changed when Lionel's health began to fail. The man who had once seemed invincible, full of bravado and charm, was suddenly brought low by a failing kidney. His lifestyle of excess, drinking, and neglect had caught up to him. Lionel, once the life of the party, now found himself facing a grim reality: he needed surgery, and he had no way to pay for it. In his desperation, Lionel turned to the one person he had always relied on, even as he mistreated her, Tamara. He knew her heart better than anyone, knew her capacity for compassion and her inability to watch someone suffer, even if that someone had caused her pain. Lionel played on her love and her faith, pleading with her for help. "I have no one else, Tamara," he said. "You're my wife. You're the only one I can count on." The irony of his words wasn't lost on her. Where were the women he had pursued so eagerly? Where were the friends he had prioritized over his family? Lionel had burned every bridge, except the one with Tamara. And now, he was asking her to cross it once again. Tamara faced an agonizing decision. Her friends and family begged her to stand firm, to say no, to let Lionel face the consequences of his actions. "He's used you enough," they warned. "This isn't your burden to carry." But Tamara's heart couldn't bear the thought of his suffering. Despite everything, she still loved him. And more than that, she couldn't ignore the call of her faith. How could she turn away from someone in need, even if that someone had hurt her? As Lionel's condition worsened, Tamara made the choice that would change her life forever. She decided to help him, knowing full well the cost, financially, emotionally, and physically. It wasn't just the money she had saved for years, working long hours to provide for her family. It was her very sense of self that she sacrificed, placing his needs above her own once again. And now, the question falls to you: could you do the same? Could you find it in your heart to give everything to someone who had given you so little in return? Or would you walk away, letting them face the consequences of their own choices? Let us know in the comments below. Lionel's plea for help was not just a moment of desperation. It was a turning point in their story, moment that revealed the depths of Tamara's resilience and the extent of Lionel's manipulation. But as we'll see, the consequences of this decision would reach far beyond what Tamara could have imagined. What would you do if the person who caused you the most pain was also the one begging for your help? Could you put aside your own suffering to save them, or would you finally choose yourself? And if you did help, what would you expect in return? Gratitude? Change? Or nothing at all? For Tamara Blake, this question wasn't hypothetical. It was the harsh reality she faced when Lionel, the man who had insulted her, betrayed her, and taken her for granted, found himself on the brink of death. His failing kidney left him weak, vulnerable, and desperate. And as always, when his world crumbled, he turned to Tamara, the one person he knew would never abandon him. Tamara was no stranger to sacrifice. She had spent years enduring Lionel's behavior, holding her family together with sheer willpower. But this? This was different. This wasn't just her pride or her emotional well-being on the line. This time, it was everything she had worked for, her savings, her future, and possibly even her health. She was faced with a choice: let Lionel suffer the consequences of his own actions or step in and save him, yet again, at her own expense. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Tamara's friends and family didn't mince words. Don't do it, they told her. He doesn't deserve your help. Let him figure it out for himself. They reminded her of everything Lionel had put her through, the affairs, the insults, the endless nights of wondering if he would ever change. They warned her that this would be no different, that Lionel would take her help and then go right back to his old ways. But Tamara's heart wasn't so easily swayed. She spent sleepless nights wrestling with her thoughts. Could she really stand by and watch Lionel suffer, knowing she had the means to help him? But then, could she justify giving everything she had to a man who had given her nothing but pain? The questions swirled in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. Loyalty battled self-preservation in a war that left her emotionally drained. Tamara's love for Lionel was complex. It wasn't the starry-eyed infatuation of their early days, nor was it blind devotion. It was a love forged in hardship, tested by betrayal, and rooted in a belief that people could change. Deep down, she wanted to believe that this could be Lionel's turning point. That if she saved him now, he might finally become the man she had always hoped he could be. And so, Tamara made her decision. Against the advice of those who loved her, she chose to step in. Lionel needed a partial nephrectomy, a procedure that came with a hefty price tag, one that Lionel couldn't afford. Tamara used her life savings, money she had spent years earning through countless hours of work, to pay for the surgery. It wasn't just money to her, it was her security, her dreams, her future. And she handed it over without hesitation. The day of the surgery was filled with emotion. Tamara sat in the hospital waiting room, her heart heavy with worry. She knew the risks, not just for Lionel, but for herself. If the surgery didn't work, she had already resolved to offer her own kidney. She would give a piece of herself, literally, to save him if it came to that. As she sat there, hands clasped tightly, she prayed for a miracle, for Lionel's life to be spared, and for this sacrifice to mean something. The surgery was a success. Lionel's life was saved, and for a brief moment, Tamara felt a glimmer of hope. She believed that this might be the turning point, the moment when Lionel would finally see her for who she truly was, the woman who had stood by him through it all. She imagined a future where they could rebuild, where gratitude would replace resentment, and where love could finally heal the wounds of their past. But even as Lionel recovered, signs of his old behavior began to resurface. At first, they were small, a dismissive comment here, a lack of acknowledgement there. Tamara brushed them off, telling herself that healing took time, not just physically but emotionally. She clung to her optimism, convinced that Lionel's brush with death would have changed him. Yet, the cracks in her hope widened. Lionel's recovery brought back his confidence, and with it, his sense of entitlement. The man who had once begged for her help now acted as though it was owed to him. Gratitude was fleeting, replaced by the same dismissive attitude that had plagued their marriage for years. And so, Tamara was left to grapple with the painful reality of her choice. She had given everything, her savings, her trust, her hope, only to find herself in the same place she had always been, underappreciated, unloved, and alone in her sacrifices. Could you have done what Tamara did? Could you have sacrificed so much for someone who had given you so little? And if you had, how would you feel when the person you saved showed no sign of changing? Let us know in the comments below. Tamara's story doesn't end here. Her sacrifice was just the beginning of a journey that would lead to one of the most heartbreaking betrayals of her life. How much betrayal can one person endure before they finally break? For Tamara Blake, the answer was not a simple one. She had endured so much already, years of infidelity, insults, and humiliation. She had sacrificed everything to save Lionel's life, believing, perhaps naively, that her love and devotion might finally change him. But Lionel Blake was not a man to be moved by love or sacrifice. As his health returned, so did his true colors. Lionel's recovery should have been a turning point in their marriage, a chance for gratitude to replace bitterness, for a second chance at the life they had once dreamed of building together. But instead, it became the moment Lionel chose to unleash the full force of his cruelty. Knowing that Tamara was now financially ruined, he weaponized her sacrifices against her. The man who had begged for her help, who had been saved by her love and devotion, now used her vulnerability to tear her down. "You're fat, broke, and useless," he sneered at her one evening, his words as sharp as knives. "I can't settle for less anymore." The insult hung in the air, heavy and cutting, as Tamara stood in stunned silence. She had heard hurtful words from Lionel before, but this was different. There was no trace of the man who had once relied on her, no hint of gratitude for the life she had saved. Instead, there was only contempt. Tamara's world began to unravel. Every cruel word, every dismissive glance from Lionel was a reminder of the sacrifices she had made and the dreams she had given up for him. She had spent years working tirelessly, saving every penny she could, only to have it all taken from her. Now, even the man she had saved refused to see her worth. The breaking point came one ordinary evening when Lionel walked into their home and handed Tamara a neatly folded envelope. Inside was a divorce letter. The words on the page blurred as tears filled her eyes. She read them again and again, hoping she had misunderstood. But the message was clear: Lionel was leaving her. Shaking, Tamara turned to Lionel, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" she asked, the word trembling with pain. "Why are you doing this to me? I gave you everything. I saved your life, and now you're leaving me for someone else." Her voice cracked as she pleaded with him to reconsider. "I can change," she begged. "I'll lose the weight. I'll look sexy again. Just give me a chance." But Lionel's heart was unmoved. He looked at her with cold indifference and said, "This isn't about you, Tamara. It's about me. I deserve better. I deserve someone who makes me happy." The words stung like a slap, each one a fresh wound on Tamara's already broken heart. That someone Lionel was referring to was already waiting in the wings. A younger woman, wealthy and conventionally attractive, had taken Tamara's place in Lionel's affections. She was everything Lionel claimed Tamara was not: slim, glamorous, and untouched by the struggles that had marked Tamara's life. For Lionel, she was a symbol of the life he believed he deserved, a life free from the responsibilities and sacrifices that Tamara had shouldered alone. When Tamara asked Lionel how he could do this, how he could so easily discard the woman who had saved his life, his response was as dismissive as it was cruel. "She's everything you're not," he said flatly. "I can't keep living like this. You've given me nothing but misery, and now you've got nothing left to give." The words echoed in Tamara's mind, each one a blow to her already fragile spirit. Tamara's emotional breakdown was raw and unrelenting. She cried for hours, her sobs shaking the walls of the home they had once shared. Memories of their life together flooded her mind, the early days when she believed in their love, the nights she spent worrying about him, the sacrifices she made to save him. It all felt like a cruel joke, a punishment for believing in a man who had never truly valued her. Yet, even in her pain, Tamara begged Lionel to stay. She offered to change everything about herself, to mold herself into the woman he claimed he wanted. "I'll be the woman you need," she told him through tears. "Just don't leave me. Don't leave our family." But Lionel was unmoved. His decision had been made long before he handed her that letter. As Lionel walked out of their home for the last time, Tamara was left with nothing but questions. How could someone she loved so deeply, someone she had sacrificed so much for, turn his back on her so easily? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, was her love for him worth the price she had paid? The answer, as we'll soon see, would not come easily. Lionel's betrayal was not just the end of their marriage. It was the beginning of a series of events that would lead Tamara down a path she never imagined she would take. Some betrayals come quietly, with whispers and shadows. Others are loud, brazen, and unapologetic. For Tamara Blake, Lionel's betrayal was not only loud, it was a thunderclap that shattered whatever remnants of her spirit she had left. After the divorce, Tamara worked hard to keep herself afloat. She was left with little to her name, her life savings gone, her heart broken, and her sense of self-worth in tatters. But she was determined to rebuild, if not for herself, then for her children. She clung to the small threads of dignity she had left, praying for the strength to move on from the devastation Lionel had left behind. Then, one day, a letter arrived. The envelope was crisp, almost pristine, a stark contrast to the chaos it would soon unleash in Tamara's life. Inside was an invitation, adorned with gold lettering and the unmistakable scent of arrogance. It was an invitation to Lionel's wedding. Her hands trembled as she held the card, her eyes scanning the words that seemed to mock her existence. Lionel wasn't just marrying someone else, he was celebrating his betrayal as though it were a victory. He had moved on so effortlessly, so brazenly, while Tamara was still trying to piece together the fragments of her life. The audacity of the gesture sent shockwaves through her family and friends. How could Lionel be so callous? How could he expect Tamara to stand witness to his new beginning, knowing full well the devastation he had left in his wake? "This is beyond cruel," her best friend muttered, barely able to contain her anger. "It's like he's rubbing salt in the wound, and then twisting the knife for good measure." Tamara tried to ignore it, to dismiss the letter as yet another cruel act from a man who had long since proven he had no heart. But the words lingered in her mind. They weren't just an invitation, they were a declaration. Lionel was telling her, in no uncertain terms, that her sacrifices meant nothing, that her love was inconsequential, that her pain was irrelevant. Her turmoil grew with each passing day. Tamara couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the image of Lionel standing at the altar with another woman. The thought of him smiling, laughing, living a life of luxury with the woman he had chosen over her was unbearable. Her mind replayed every moment of their past, the sacrifices, the insults, the betrayal, and each memory brought a fresh wave of anguish. Her friends tried to comfort her, but their words felt hollow. "You're better off without him," they said, but Tamara couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. How could someone who had caused so much pain walk away unscathed? How could Lionel live so freely while she was still trapped in the prison of her heartbreak? Tamara knew she couldn't carry the weight of her emotions any longer. She had to confront Lionel, not to change his mind. She knew that ship had sailed, but to find closure, to demand answers, to make him see the destruction he had left behind. Her decision to confront him was not one she made lightly. It was the culmination of years of pain, anger, and betrayal that had finally reached a breaking point. Tamara knew the confrontation wouldn't heal her wounds, but she couldn't live with the unanswered questions that haunted her every waking moment. Tamara reached out to Lionel, asking for a meeting. His response was as dismissive as ever. "I'm busy," he said, his tone devoid of any emotion. But Tamara pressed on, insisting that they meet, that she needed to see him one last time. Reluctantly, Lionel agreed, giving her the address of his new home, the home he now shared with his fiancée. As she prepared to confront Lionel, Tamara's emotions swirled like a storm. Anger, sadness, and desperation battled for dominance. She wasn't sure what she hoped to achieve by seeing him, but she knew she couldn't move forward without saying what had been weighing on her heart for so long. Tamara's breaking point was not a single moment, it was the culmination of 1,000 cuts, a lifetime of giving and receiving nothing in return. And as she stood on the precipice of this confrontation, one question echoed in her mind: would facing Lionel bring her the closure she so desperately needed, or would it only deepen the wounds he had inflicted? Little did she know, this confrontation would set into motion events that would change both of their lives forever. Sometimes, a person can endure so much pain, so much betrayal, that they become a shadow of who they once were. But even the most broken heart has its limits. For Tamara Blake, that limit was reached on a fateful evening that would change everything. After days of agonizing over her decision, Tamara made her way to Lionel's new apartment. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find: closure, perhaps, or at least a chance to be heard. But as she climbed the steps to his new life, her heart was heavy with the weight of her sacrifices and the injustice of his betrayal. Tamara was greeted by an apartment that spoke volumes about Lionel's new priorities. It was sleek, modern, and filled with all the trappings of luxury, trappings that Tamara's savings had helped make possible. Lionel stood in the center of it all, exuding confidence and pride, a stark contrast to the man who had once begged her for help. "So, what do you think?" Lionel asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Not bad for someone you thought couldn't make it without you, huh?" His words hit like a hammer, each one a reminder of how little he valued everything Tamara had done for him. Tamara tried to hold her composure, but Lionel's words only grew more cutting. He gestured to a photo of himself and his fiancée, prominently displayed on the wall. "This is what real happiness looks like," he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. "She's everything you're not, young, beautiful, successful. You were holding me back, Tamara. I finally see that now." The comparison stung more than Tamara could have imagined. Lionel wasn't just moving on, he was rewriting their history, erasing her sacrifices as though they had never happened. "I gave you everything," Tamara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I saved your life. How can you stand there and say these things to me?" But Lionel only shrugged, his indifference cutting deeper than any insult. "I didn't ask you to save me," he said flatly. "You chose to. That's on you." The words hung in the air, each one a dagger to Tamara's already fragile heart. Her mind raced, replaying every moment of their past, the nights she stayed up worrying about him, the years of sacrifices she had made to keep their family together, the life savings she had poured into his survival. And now, here he was, mocking her, dismissing her pain as though it were nothing. Tamara's emotions churned like a storm. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all collided, threatening to consume her. Lionel, oblivious to the depth of her pain, continued his tirade. "You should be thanking me," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "If it weren't for me, you'd still be that pathetic little woman with no direction. At least now you know your place." Something inside Tamara snapped. It wasn't a sudden moment of rage, but the culmination of years of pain, betrayal, and humiliation. Her vision blurred, her heart pounded, and before she realized what was happening, her hand reached into her bag. When it emerged, it held a gun, one she had never intended to use, one that now felt like an extension of her anguish. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Tamara asked, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and despair. Lionel's smug expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his bravado. "What are you gonna do, Tamara? Shoot me? Go ahead. It'd be the first real thing you've done in years." The words were the final straw. In a moment of uncontrollable rage, Tamara pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the apartment, shattering the silence and leaving a void that no words could fill. Lionel fell to the ground, his smugness replaced by shock and disbelief. And then, there was only silence. Tamara stood frozen, the weight of what she had done crashing down on her. The gun slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor as she stared at Lionel's lifeless body. Her mind raced, her heart shattered. This wasn't who she was. This wasn't the woman she had fought so hard to be. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The pain, the betrayal, the years of suffering, they had all led to this. And as Tamara stood there, the echoes of her actions reverberating around her, one question loomed larger than all the others: how had it come to this? The events of that fateful night sent shockwaves through Tamara Blake's life. The quiet, devoted woman who had sacrificed everything for her husband was now at the center of a scandal that gripped her community and captured national attention. Lionel Blake's death wasn't just another crime, it was the culmination of a story that had been unraveling for years, a story of sacrifice, betrayal, and, ultimately, retribution. The police arrived at Lionel's apartment that same night, alerted by neighbors who had heard the gunshot. Tamara was still there, sitting on the floor, her hands trembling as she stared into the distance. She didn't resist as they placed her in handcuffs. She didn't deny what she had done. In her mind, the events were as clear as they were surreal, years of pain and betrayal compressed into one irreversible moment. As the trial began, the courtroom became a stage for a debate that went far beyond the specifics of Tamara's actions. Her lawyer painted a vivid picture of her life, a life marked by sacrifice and abuse, by unwavering loyalty to a man who had repaid her love with cruelty. Tamara Blake is not a monster, her lawyer argued. She is a woman pushed to the edge by years of emotional torment, a woman who gave everything and was left with nothing. The prosecution, on the other hand, focused on the cold, hard facts. Lionel Blake was dead, and Tamara had pulled the trigger. They portrayed her actions as premeditated, an act of revenge rather than desperation. No matter the circumstances, the prosecutor said, no one has the right to take the law into their own hands. The trial was a spectacle, with every detail of Tamara and Lionel's life laid bare for the world to see. Friends, family, and even former neighbors took the stand, offering their perspectives on the couple's tumultuous relationship. Some spoke of Lionel's charm and charisma, while others recounted his cruelty and selfishness. Tamara's sacrifices were brought to light, the life savings she had given up, the emotional abuse she had endured, the dreams she had put aside for a man who never appreciated her. As the days stretched into weeks, the courtroom became a battleground for a larger conversation. Was Tamara a victim, pushed to the breaking point by years of mistreatment? Or was she a perpetrator, someone who allowed her emotions to spiral out of control and ended a life in a moment of rage? Tamara herself remained quiet throughout the trial. When she did speak, her words were simple but haunting. I loved him, she said, tears streaming down her face. I loved him more than I loved myself. And that was my mistake. As the trial drew to a close, the jury was left with a question that was as much moral as it was legal. Did Tamara's years of suffering justify her actions? Could they see her as a woman who had been driven to the edge, or would they only see the act of violence that ended Lionel's life? How much should one person give before they have the right to say enough? Was Tamara's decision to stay with Lionel an act of love, or was it a failure to value herself? Tamara Blake, the woman who had given everything for love and lost herself in the process, was found guilty of manslaughter. The court acknowledged the years of abuse and betrayal she had endured, recognizing the emotional and psychological toll that had driven her to the breaking point. However, the act of taking a life could not go unpunished. The judge handed down her sentence, 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 7. It was a sentence that struck a delicate balance. A recognition of the immense pain she had suffered, but also a reminder of the consequences of her actions. The jury's decision was not an easy one, nor was it the end of the story. Tamara's life would never return to what it had been, and the questions raised by her case would linger in the minds of those who followed it. Was she a victim or a villain? A woman pushed too far or someone who let her anger consume her? And now, the question falls to you, what would you have done in Tamara's place? Was her act one of justice, or was it a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Reflecting on her sacrifices, Tamara admitted that love had blinded her to the importance of self-respect. I thought love could fix everything, she once said. But I forgot to love myself in the process. Her journey became a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring the signs of a toxic relationship. Tamara's story teaches us that love, while powerful, should never come at the cost of your dignity or well-being. True love uplifts and supports, it doesn't destroy. Remember, recognizing your worth and walking away from toxicity is not failure, it's survival. Thank you for watching. If you found this story thought-provoking, please subscribe for more in-depth narratives and reflections. Your support helps us continue to share stories that matter.